There are moments in life when the ground beneath you disappears, not literally, but it feels like it. One moment, I was a wife, a partner, someone building a future with the man I thought I knew better than anyone. And the next? I was standing in our empty living room, staring at an account balance that read 0, and a message on the kitchen counter that simply said, "I'm sorry." I can still remember the silence of that moment. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that drowns you, suffocates you. My husband, Mark, the man I built 12 years of my life with, was gone. Not just emotionally, but physically. And with him, every cent we had saved together, gone, just like that. It wasn't like I didn't see the little signs, the late nights at work, the sudden trips, the way he started avoiding eye contact when I asked about his day. But never, not even in my worst nightmares, did I think he was capable of something like this, leaving me for her. For her. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed you this way? How would you react if the person who vowed to protect you was the one who left you shattered, broke, and alone? I don't know how I stayed standing that day, but let me tell you something. Mark didn't just walk away scot-free. No, he thought he won. He thought I was defeated, but he never saw what I had in store for him. This is my story. The story of how I lost everything, and the story of how I got it all back, and more. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Before we get started with my story, I want to ask you, what would you do if the person you trusted the most betrayed you in the worst way possible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And if you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe, like this video, and click the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories like this one. Let's begin. My name is Haley Charles. For 12 years, I was married to Mark Charles. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were the perfect couple. We had a beautiful home, promising careers, and what I thought was an unshakable bond. But life has a way of showing you that appearances can be deceiving. Mark and I met in college. He was charming, the kind of man who made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. He had a confidence that was intoxicating, and when he looked at you, it felt like you were the only person in the world. When he proposed to me, I didn't hesitate. I thought I had found the man who would protect me, love me, and stand by me forever. And for years, that's exactly what it felt like. Secure, steady, right. Our life together wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. Sundays meant coffee on the patio, planning our week ahead, and sharing our dreams for the future. Mark always talked about retiring early, traveling the world, maybe buying a small house by the ocean where we could grow old together. Those weren't just his dreams, they were ours. But now, looking back, I see things I didn't see then. Little moments that seemed harmless at the time, but in hindsight, were so much more. It started with late nights at the office. He'd call me to say, "Don't wait up, Haley. I've got a lot to finish up." At first, I didn't think anything of it. Mark had always been ambitious, driven. I told myself that he was doing all of this for us, for our future. But the late nights turned into weekends. The business trips started coming more frequently, and then there were the subtle changes I couldn't quite put my finger on. He bought new cologne, started dressing sharper for work. His phone, which used to sit out on the counter, was now always in his pocket, locked with a password I didn't know. There was one night. I'll never forget it. It was about 6 months before everything fell apart. We were supposed to have dinner together, something we always did on Fridays. I'd cooked his favorite, pasta with homemade sauce. But when I called him to ask what time he'd be home, his phone went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him. Hours passed, and when he finally walked through the door, he didn't look like the Mark I knew. His shirt was rumpled, his tie was askew, and he smelled faintly of perfume, not mine. When I asked him how his day was, he gave me this distant smile and said, "Long, I'm going to bed." And just like that, he disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there with unanswered questions swirling in my mind. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Mark had always been so open with me, so transparent. But now, it was like he was slipping away, and I couldn't figure out why. Then came the small lies. He'd tell me he had a meeting, but his calendar would say otherwise. Or he'd mention a new hire at the office but never elaborate. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But the harder I tried to hold on to the Mark I thought I knew, the further away he seemed. And then there was the phone. One evening, I noticed it buzz while he was in the shower. My eyes instinctively went to the screen, and for a moment, I froze. The name flashing on the screen wasn't a coworker. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was just a first name, Samantha. And the message? A simple, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, cry, throw the phone across the room. But instead, I put it back where I found it and sat on the bed, my mind racing. Who was she? Could she be his secretary Sam? Or another person? What did she mean to him? And why was I so afraid to ask? $1 million questions running in my head at once. If you've ever been in a situation like this, you know that feeling. The pit in your stomach, the way your chest tightens, the way your thoughts spiral as you try to make sense of what you've just seen. I spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few months, searching for answers in the moments I had ignored. That night, something shifted inside me. I wasn't ready to confront Mark, not yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life, the life I had spent 12 years building, was no longer mine. And deep down, I knew that whatever was happening, it was only the beginning. If you're still watching, I'd love to know, how do you think you would have handled this situation if you were in my shoes? Do you agree with my actions, or would you have done something differently? Share your opinion in the comments. I'm always curious to hear your perspectives. And don't forget to like this video if you're finding it interesting so far, and make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more stories just like this one. After a few days, thinking, who is this Samantha? But I don't want that to spoil our coming anniversary, which it is in few days. The day arrives. He didn't say anything in the morning. He left earlier. I thought maybe he would surprise me in the night, that why he didn't say anything thinking I forgot. Like he used to do, he will come home earlier or take the day off, spend all day with me. But that day was different. Our anniversary night, Mark came home later than usual. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. I had planned a small surprise for him, a quiet dinner to celebrate the anniversary of the day we first met. But when I mentioned it, he barely looked at me. "Sorry, Haley," he said, running his hands through his hair. "I completely forgot. It's just been nonstop at the office." He kissed me on the forehead and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me sitting at the table, staring at the untouched candles I'd lit. At the time, I told myself it was just work. Mark had always been ambitious, dedicated. But as the weeks went on, those moments of distance became more frequent. He started taking calls late at night, slipping into the other room with his voice lowered. When I asked him about it, he shrugged it off. "It's just a new client," he said, offering me a half smile. The phone was the first thing that truly unsettled me. Mark had always been an open book, leaving his phone out on the counter, answering calls in front of me. But now it was always in his pocket, the screen facing down whenever he put it on the table. One night, I playfully reached for it while we were watching TV, and his reaction was instant. He grabbed it before I could even touch it, his face tightening. "It's just work stuff," he said, his tone sharp. It was a shift I couldn't ignore, but I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. I convinced myself I was overreacting. "That's what trust is, right?" You give your partner the benefit of the doubt, even when something doesn't feel quite right. Then came the weekend trip. Mark told me he had to go to a conference. Last minute, unavoidable. He promised he'd call every night, but the calls were short, rushed, and always ended with him saying, "I've got to go." On the second night, I heard a faint voice in the background, a woman's laugh. "Who's there?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Just some colleagues. We're having a quick drink before bed." That laugh stayed with me. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind of laugh that felt too familiar, too personal. But I didn't press him. I wanted to, but the fear of what I might hear stopped me. The breaking point came 2 months later. Mark had left his phone on the nightstand while he was in the shower. It buzzed once, twice. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I picked it up, the name on the screen the same. Samantha. I didn't mean to look, but my hands were moving before my mind could stop them. The message read, "I miss you. Can't wait for this weekend." My chest tightened as I scrolled up, each message worse than the last. Photos, plans, declarations of affection. They weren't talking about work. They weren't even trying to hide it. I felt the room spinning around me. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back down, careful not to leave any evidence that I'd seen it. Mark came out of the shower moments later, smiling like nothing had happened. I watched him, feeling like I was seeing a stranger for the first time. But the worst was yet to come. A week later, I went to pay the mortgage. I logged into our joint account and froze. The balance was 0. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I refreshed the page, checked again, but it didn't change. Everything was gone. I called the bank, my heart pounding in my chest. They confirmed the transfers. Large sums moved to an account I didn't recognize. When I asked who had authorized it, the answer hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark, my husband, the man I had trusted with everything. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to make an excuse. "I'm leaving, Haley," he said, his voice cold, detached. "It's over." "And the money?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "I need it to start over," he said, not even looking at me. "You'll figure it out. You always do." He packed a bag and walked out the door, leaving me standing there in the empty house we had built together. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to stay, but I couldn't move. It was like my body had shut down, unable to process what had just happened. That night, I sat on the floor of our living room, staring at the emptiness around me. Everything I had built, everything I had trusted, was gone. But as the hours passed, something inside me shifted. I realized I had a choice to make. I could let this destroy me, or I could find a way to fight back. And that's when I decided. Mark might have taken everything from me, but he wasn't going to win. Not this time. What I did next would change everything, and Mark never saw it coming. When Mark walked out that door, it felt like the final blow. I sat there for hours, staring into the empty space he left behind. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I replayed his words over and over in my head. How he left, how he justified taking everything we had built together, as if it were his to decide. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I was too numb. At some point, the numbness began to fade, replaced by something else. Anger, determination. He thought he had won. He thought he could take everything and leave me broken. But if Mark knew me at all, he should have known that I wasn't someone who gave up easily. I knew I needed to act quickly. The first thing I did was call the bank. I needed answers, and I needed to know exactly what had happened to our accounts. The woman on the other end of the line confirmed what I already suspected. Mark had transferred nearly every cent into a separate account in his name. He hadn't just left me emotionally shattered, he'd left me financially ruined. But what he didn't count on was how meticulous I could be. I spent the next 2 days combing through every financial record I could find. I pulled up statements, receipts, anything that might give me leverage. And then I remembered something. A detail Mark probably thought I'd never notice. Months earlier, we'd signed a financial agreement with our lawyer regarding joint assets. It wasn't something we talked about much at the time, but in that moment, it became my lifeline. The document clearly outlined that any major financial withdrawals required joint approval. What Mark had done wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. Armed with this knowledge, I reached out to my lawyer. I laid everything out: the messages from Samantha, the bank transfers, the document Mark had violated. My lawyer didn't mince words. "You have a strong case," she said. "He won't walk away from this without consequences." But I wasn't just focused on the legal aspect. Mark had built his professional reputation on integrity and hard work. He was well respected in his field, and his position came with strict codes of conduct. I knew for a fact that his affair with Samantha, who was still working under him, was a violation of his company's policies. I gathered all the evidence I had: screenshots of their texts, dates that coincided with his so-called business trips, even photos they had sent each other. I didn't want to act impulsively, but I also knew that Mark needed to understand the consequences of his actions. I drafted a detailed email and sent it directly to his company's HR department. I included everything they would need to conduct their investigation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Mark had made his choices, and now he would have to face them. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, I got a call from someone who had worked with Mark. "Did you hear?" they asked. "He's been suspended. They're investigating him and Samantha." I didn't say much in response, but inside I felt a sense of justice beginning to take shape. Meanwhile, the legal process was moving forward. My lawyer filed an injunction to freeze what was left of our joint assets, preventing Mark from accessing them further. She also filed a formal case to recover the money he had taken. Every day, I felt stronger, more determined. Then came the court date. Mark showed up, looking tired and deflated. He didn't have the same bravado he'd had when he walked out of our house. He tried to argue that he needed the money for his new life, but the judge didn't buy it. The evidence was clear, and the ruling was swift. Mark was ordered to return the money he had taken, along with additional damages for the emotional and financial hardship he had caused me. It wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. Mark had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he was left with nothing. Samantha didn't stick around for long either. From what I heard, she left him when the investigation at work cost him his job. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For months I had carried the burden of Mark's betrayal, the financial ruin he tried to leave me in, and the lies he spun to justify his actions. But now things were finally shifting in my favor. The judge had ruled decisively. Mark was ordered to return every cent he had taken from our joint accounts, along with additional compensation for the damages he had caused. I'll never forget the look on his face when the verdict was announced. Defeated, embarrassed, and for the first time, powerless. It wasn't just a financial victory, it was a moral one. But the fallout didn't end there. The evidence I had sent to Mark's company had sparked a full investigation. His superiors took the situation seriously. Affairs with subordinates were strictly prohibited in their workplace policy. The company acted quickly, and within weeks, Mark's position was terminated. Samantha, his so-called new beginning, was fired as well. I heard about their breakup not long after. It turns out, Mark had been less than honest with her too. He had promised her a new life, a fresh start funded by what he stole from me. But with his finances frozen, his job gone, and his reputation in tatters, there wasn't much of a future to offer. From what I was told, she left him when she realized he had nothing left to give. And me? I focused on rebuilding. At first, it felt impossible. I had to pick up the pieces of my life, figure out how to start over from scratch. But little by little, I found my footing again. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with, leaned on my family for support, and even started therapy to help process everything I had been through. I also took a hard look at my career. For years, I had supported Mark's ambitions, often putting his goals ahead of my own. But now, it was my turn. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and pushing myself to achieve things I had never thought possible. One of the most satisfying moments came a year later, when I bought back the house Mark had tried to take from me. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for, everything I had reclaimed. Standing in that living room, I felt a sense of pride and independence that I hadn't felt in years. Mark reached out once, months after the court case was over. His email was short, vague, something about wanting to apologize, to explain his side of things. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him pull me back into the chaos he had created. People often ask me if I regret going through all of this, if I regret fighting back, exposing Mark and holding him accountable. And my answer is always the same. No, I don't regret a single thing. What Mark did was unforgivable, but it taught me something invaluable, that I'm stronger than I ever realized. I learned that betrayal doesn't define you. It doesn't have to break you. It's what you do after that matters. It's how you take back control, how you rebuild, and how you refuse to let someone else's actions dictate your future. Today, I'm in a better place than I ever thought possible. Financially, I've recovered. Emotionally, I've healed. And for the first time in years, I feel free. As for Mark, I don't think about him much anymore. From what I've heard, he's still trying to piece his life together, moving from one failed opportunity to the next. And honestly, that's enough for me. He made his choices, and now he has to live with them. If there's one thing I hope people take away from my story, it's this. You are stronger than you think. No matter how dark things may seem, there's always a way to rise again. And when you do, the people who tried to break you will realize they never stood a chance. Thank you for watching and following my story. What's your biggest takeaway from my journey? Do you feel like I got the justice I deserved, or would you have taken a different approach? Let me know your thoughts, and also tell me where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all over the world. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you're the first to know when I post more compelling stories. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.